Wait, really? You got the black, the white, you got the same, like, you know, you got the pattern. This is like totally by accident.
100%.
It's festive.
Oh, hell yeah. Okay. So my observation yesterday after, you know, I'd opened up that dialogue about, at a certain point in yesterday's conversation, I think after the governor left, I think the entire conversation got very divisive. And when there's 10 people on both ends of the, both sides, just kind of, I think honest conversation ends up stopping because, you know, a lot of people in the room, right?
I agree. And I kind of expected it to go that way once, you know, the referee stepped out of the room and the finger pointing got a little bit more obvious. And I think that's just the nature of the game. I mean, the whole time we were very much in our corners, right? Ding, ding. But like, I appreciated the dialogue nonetheless, even though there was some, you know, lack of civility. It
that was
mean
nothing, by the way. It's been way worse.
I know. Listen, I could understand that it was nothing. It was in comparison to what it has been, but it doesn't mean that it still shouldn't be happening, you know?
Yeah.
We still need to work together.
I agree.
Okay, so
I wanted to
wise, what do you feel like wasn't accomplished?
well, I want to start by saying this is I've spoken to my staff about this, and I want to first start by giving some, and I don't want to dive into details, but from our perspective, whether, you know, whether you buy into it or not, which I'm sure you do to some degree, we pride to a less, at different levels, my cabinet and in turn our constituency does have a level of has grievances that stem back 4 months, right? So this saga has been not only kind of paid a toll on us, but like there's a lot of animosity and a lot of anger directed at the DOJ due to past actions that we perceive to be a whole slew of things, right?
I can 100% see that. I will never deny that.
Yes.
I mean, hell, and the only reason why I say that is that, you know, I have been one trying to reach out, and my job was so limiting in the avenues that I couldn't help the way that I wanted to. But I saw those frustrations firsthand. And I want to make sure that we don't have those same situations happen again, because holy shit, you guys were just blue balled and bottlenecked every chance you got.
Yeah.
And I'll recognize that. And that was a failure of the DOJ, 100%.
And I do appreciate that. And I made it a point yesterday after the meeting to let my staff know that the way I operate, that I've always operated, is that you cannot hold an entire group, organization, whatever it is, responsible for the actions of the whole or the actions of an individual or a few individuals. In other words, what happened before, what that meeting room had a lot of faces that had very little to do with most of the bullshit that we had to deal with. And that putting that like blame or like holding that onto that history is not going to be productive towards, I think, what all of us want, which is a functioning government, right? And while there may be disagreements, we should be having those disagreements with a energy that we should reset our energy, is what I told them.
I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Because I'm not naive. I very much see the shit show that I'm being handed right now.
Yeah.
It is a dumpster fire that's literally been nuked. The thought that you guys are even willing to hopefully have a turn of the page, a fresh chapter, is all I could ever ask for.
Yeah.
There's going to be a new wave of justices who want to be here, who are wanting to be active. I personally want to do everything I possibly can for progress and growth in the city. That is all I have ever wanted. And so I really hope with that intention in mind that we can all work together. And I know we're not going to agree on everything. I know there's going to be hiccups and bumps in the road. But as long as we're, having a dialogue, I think that's all we can ever ask for. Maybe that's me being naive and optimistic, but
I don't think so. I do think it's important for me to say that while myself and Pred share similar positions on some respects, I don't share all of them. For example, I have worked with you long enough, and I've seen. I mean, I told you a while. I mean, listen, I've told you you should have been a justice a while ago, right? And that my position hasn't changed with that. What I don't reciprocate. Now, to be fair, right? There's a reason, right? You had your signature on the end of the thing. He's gonna have 100%. His personal stuff behind it, but we're not like unified necessarily on the on all fronts. So I want to be clear that my cabinet does have its own agenda, I guess. I mean, we all have an agenda, but our agenda here is let's make this shit work. And where I think we wanted that dialogue yesterday to go, which I don't think concluded, is
I don't think so either. I'm glad you reached out to me to have a meeting.
Yeah.
The first thing I wanted to do out of my mouth was after that meeting to go up to you. It was like, okay, what can we do next?
Yeah.
I think we kind of put a lot of stuff to bed, but we haven't talked next steps.
I think that a singular meeting is not going to generate the clarity that either party needs. That's my gut. And I think part of that is we are living in a paradigm where there are 4 branches of government, and to some degree, every branch is going to be in its own bubble, right? Natural bubble, right? And the more that there's communication, there'll be better understanding, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
I couldn't agree more. And hopefully that 100% getting it fixed, because I think that is very much the root of the problems with that, at least from my interpretation of what you've been dealing with for the past 4 months, is the complete lack of a communication. And again, I'm going to fully say it, by the failure of the DOJ.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I know I'm not going to sweep it under the rug. I'm going to call a spade a spade. You guys have been fucked over enough. I want us to recognize the issues,
Absolutely.
learn from them, and move forward.
Yeah. And I think I think we're ready for that. And, I want to kind of poke at the sheriff document and not because I want to necessarily reopen that entire conversation. We can, but rather explain my intent of the conversation. Right. And maybe this will shed some light on like how I think and what I personally like to get out of those kind of conversations. For me, whether Pred is ultimately removed or not removed is less of a concern for me rather than the clarity of process. And so I think a lot of the dialogue yesterday about clarifying that, there is due process, like due process can happen in multiple stages, right? I think there was general ultimately agreement that there can be an impeachment process and yada da da da. That clarity is good, right? And but the reason why I pointed back at that document is it exposed a very critical concern that I see happening down the line, which as legislative writers, we're concerned that we write something, but then the interpretation of our writing is then grossly misinterpreted. Not intentionally, but rather due to the approach, the interpretation, the approach that is used to interpret the legal document. And while it is absolutely and fundamentally the purview of the DOJ to interpret law, I would say that it is equally the right of the writers to have for their intent to be expressed properly, right? So when I sort of opened up that question of like, how did you guys believe, can you explain to me in your own words how you're deriving that this document is about the mayor. It was less so to challenge and say, fuck you guys. Rather, it was more, I want to understand how y'all are thinking through it. So if I can understand how you're thinking through it, I can better understand you guys. Does that kind of make sense?
That does. I can only speak for myself. I don't play telephone. I don't speak for others. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me say that
absolutely.
right there. If you want to ask the other justices of what their ideas were, who were part of the conversation, I told you who the ones who were part of it were.
Yeah.
You're welcome to.
Absolutely.
Well, obviously, aside from Angel because she resigned. The way I interpreted it was, it was coming from a common sense understanding of us trying to use the English language with the what's the fucking like the mayoral's office it makes sense in every other scope, in every other realm that we are talking about the mayor's office, for the mayor to be a part of that office. Same thing with if we're talking about the LSPD, the chief of police is part of the LSPD. Talking about BCSO, the sheriff is part of BCSO, the justice is part of the DOJ. That, and in the common sense interpretation from the conversations that we've been having for months now, from when I've been being brought up as a judge, was that we are joined to try and be adults and use this language intelligently. And so that was where I stem from. The mayoral office, the mayor is part of the office, and so I brought it forward to the
Sticky,
justices.
think of the prime sub.
With you, at that point, I was like, "Here's what I have. Look at this," and they told me, "Okay, you're right." And that's where the conversation pretty much ended.
So that I want to touch on that at some point, because I want to touch on that because holy fuck. But I do want to close the loop. Here's how we read it, right? And
I think we've already had this conversation, last night. We went through the first line of an introduction, and I'll be honest, I think you're right. I think I can understand what you're saying, and I think that, like you said, your intention with this is to respect what the intentions of the authors of the legislation are, to think a bit broader than just in general terms. And then I go again with you and Michael about how with the penal code, and I know this is seeming like a sidebar, but give me a minute, I'm cooking.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's because I think you're right. As much as we've been saying, okay, we live in this society where we would like to not have to operate on semantics and nitpickingness and having to fall back on definitions. I think at the end of the day, you are right in that we need it because of this exact situation. Greyson and I were literally just talking about on the drive up here about why this was such a failure. And it was coming to kind of a place of the DOJ felt like they had to stand behind bad legislation. None of us, and I know it sounds weird and it's falling on deaf ears, and I've been screamed at by this enough. But unfortunately, yes, it is bad legislation, but it is our job, it is our lawful duty to stand by the legislation. And that is what the intention and the belief was. I still don't agree with it because I'm my own individual person, but as a judge at the time, I had to stand by it. I didn't want to go in the middle of the night and change something on a dime to create my own narrative because I thought, oh, hey, this is wrong.
I will say that I do not hold that against you. And I think that's part of why the value of speaking separately is I understand what you are trying to say. I understand what you're saying here. Okay. So at the end of the day, you have to interpret something. And if you believe action must be taken, then you take it. And that the introduction of external biases is not something that should occur because then you are not effectively fulfilling your role. Now, I may disagree with the action you are taking, but that disagreement that's where due process takes place. And I think that is was clarified yesterday, right? That's how we go to court and we say, this is why we did this. And then the defense can say, well, we disagree. This is why we think it's wrong. And then clarity comes out of it via said due process.
I agree. And unfortunately, it was also the mind of the justices that due process that already happened. This whole thing is just shit mud sticking together, because there was like a bunch of factors that like kind of completed the circle in a really, really, really shitty way.
Yeah.
And I'll admit it, it was shitty, but it added up where it was like lawful in the interpretation of the law. I don't agree with it, but shit,
I think some of
it
the
was
issue
shit.
with it here is that you're running into like jurisprudential like conflicts. Like, okay, when I say jurisprudential, I'm talking about like, the
777.
philosophy of
Thank you
law,
for the
the way
fresh
you
sub.
interpret it, right? When you look at it,
Yes.
intentionally, the way we look at it, because of the constitution we have from July, it comes from a place of, if it isn't written down, we don't do it, right? That's the underlying philosophy of the
100%.
law,
That's all
right?
I've ever
But
told.
then we're moving in a way where we're trying to make things more simple and more, you know, semantically, it is what it appears to be, right? So if somebody says the mayor's office, as Justice Arcadia said, the idea is, well, obviously, prima facie, on the face of it, we're looking at the mayor being a part of that. But then, traditionally, with any lawyer ever, it's all about what's actually said in the legislation and not about what the broad strokes are around it, right? People are going to get nitty gritty and sweaty about the specific words. And I don't mean that in a bad way. As a lawyer, the way I work too, right?
Yeah.
But I think that like we've got like an actual conflict of the philosophy behind how we're looking at the law. That's popped up in this
Yes.
one regard instantly.
And I think that's exactly what was on display yesterday. And when I heard, and that's kind of what I think what I extrapolated from what was said was that we're taking the definition of what the Blaine County Mayor's office is external from this document and applying it to the document, and this is then the reading of it, right?
Yeah.
Which is it's a position, right? I may not agree with the position, but it's a position, and I think where things got a little heated was it kind of felt like we were fishing for that a position, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even if we were to ultimately disagree with it, I think from myself, I was getting heated from the lack of the position, right?
I think it happened in a couple of places, right? When I was talking to Arcadia before, it all comes down to the interpretation of like in good standing too, right? Which isn't legislated specifically, but
Agreed.
then people make decisions.
Again,
because there is so many ways that can be taken. Yeah, but common sense, that could be like
okay,
no
but like
misdemeanors, that could be no traffic citations, that could be no felonies.
You know exactly what that means.
I do, 100%, right?
So,
but there's a difference between somebody who applies for a job and is hired by a boss who has oversight and a democratically elected mayor, right?
So,
like, look at America, look at Trump, look at the different protections he gets over, say, just a random law enforcement officer, right? It's different.
Yeah.
There are different positions here, and I think like some acceptance of that will go a long way.
I could appreciate that. I can, but unfortunately, again, I hate to keep falling back to it.
Yeah.
It's just unfortunate. The term was removed. It wasn't impeached.
Okay, like if we look at the DOJ of the past, or of any DOJ I've ever worked in, right? Generally, bar license. Let's look at bar license, right? Now, if you are convicted of a felony, generally that would get you a bar review. If you are convicted of a violent felony, that is automatic removal.
So,
like there are different levels of this, and I think that that's got to be like.
Are you saying that is how it used to work in the past? I'm sorry, I missed that part.
It's always been the way it worked as far as bar licenses went. Yeah.
I don't think we have that legislated.
No, we don't have anything legislated.
Yo, Dark, think of the 19 months.
At this point now, it's all kind of like.
How the hell do we have?
She's allowed to have her position.
What do we have to do to gain more?
DOJ documentation that way, right? Same way we don't have like court guidelines. We don't have that either. But
so,
like traditionally, yes, it was always, and Nino will know this. You get a felony, so anything else you get a bar review. It isn't automatic removal, but violent felonies is where we draw the line. It's why sometimes legislatively we have violent felonies as like the level for removal or denial of office. I don't know. I think again that's a discretionary thing where somebody made a
Nino
decision.
and myself is never going to get mad when someone has a position, right, and is willing to discuss it. The lack of it is what pissed us off. So, there's two things that kind of came out of this that I kind of want to poke at a little bit. And for my own, well, I'll just kind of say it out loud. First off, I want to make it clear again that I am not going to, while I may challenge a position, I wouldn't. I'm not going to do it beyond, like, you know, like you got to fully justify your position, because at the end of the day, just the clarity alone is honestly what I was trying to seek from the very beginning. And I think some of that may have been clouded because, and Pred is equally justified to have the anger, but his anger may have clouded my intent, right? He's, you know, he had consequences applied to him, whereas I'm looking for, you get what I'm saying.
No, I get it. I don't feel like you've been combative actually at all, Nino. So I hope that's never been a thought in your mind. If anything, like you've said, I thought, like, there's always, you have your stance, I have mine. Yeah. I don't think we'll necessarily agree on it, but I do think it's being constructive.
Absolutely.
So I have no fault for you at all.
There's two things that I'm curious about. One is we're trying to simplify things. There's a statement I think you made, Greyson. We're trying to simplify things and make it less sweaty. I am not aware of that. Now, I understand that might be something, and maybe I'm speculating or reading too much
into. We talked about it in a previous meeting with you, no? Am I wrong?
We kind of, like, we did. Yeah, Hollow sort of brought it up, and we all kind of agreed. But what I'm asking is,
you, Hollow, in a courtroom once, where I remember we touched on this.
Okay. So that was that's the extent of it. Okay, I was
that, and then there was the secondary meeting that happened after that meeting that we had in the fourth floor meeting room.
I got you now.
Again with your staff.
I was concerned when I first heard that maybe this was an internal to DOJ conversation as to how things are interpreted, and that got me worried. But that's okay. That beautiful. That alleviates that. Greyson, you had mentioned, or Arcadia, you had mentioned.
Please, for the love of God, just call me Arcadia.
Yeah. You had said that, but it's just common sense. The problem with that is that there is no such thing as common sense, because common sense is always going to be via the lens of the individual, their upbringing, where they're from, et cetera, right? Because from my staff, common sense gives us a completely different reading of the material. And to give you our perspective, and this is, once again, not to challenge your position, but to give the lens of our reading, is I, having run many businesses, have had to read many technical documents, legislative documents, things along those lines. Abilene comes from an accounting background, fucking Archibald, very similar, and from where our common sense derives from is that when you have a document, there's a hierarchy of how words are read and phrases and whatnot. And the topmost is, if the document has a definition in it, that takes precedence. If it's not defined, then you look to see if the context of the document, if there's any self-defining that takes place. In other words, if there is a word, right, that if the context of the document references it and self-defines it, then that becomes the definition. And then if that doesn't exist and the word is simply, or the phrase is simply in there without any sort of self-defining nature, no references to external documents, then you go and pull it from another document that's in the same folder of documents. You know what I mean? Like in our case, other pieces of legislation. And if that doesn't exist, then you go and reference something external. Like in the case of, like, when Hollow referenced what was the word? Oh my God. What expungement meant, right? Because expungement wasn't defined anywhere in our legislation. So we had to go and reference what was expungement in U.S. law. Like, what does it mean? What does it entail? Right? Now, the reason I even bring that up is internally to our cabinet, we are now considering writing something that would act as sort of a guideline for our intent for all legislation that we are writing as to the meaning behind what exists.
Oh,
right?
God, Nino, are you writing a glossary?
No. More of like a best practice, like we're writing a, oh man, what is it called? A lot of technical writing. It's a template document, effectively. So what it does is it standardizes expectations for, and it's kind of, but not exactly. Yeah. So now from one lens, is this sweaty, right? I don't know if it is. And I want to make an argument as to, because it was brought up like, hey, does that mean we need to start writing more definitions in our legislation? I would like to hear your opinion on it. Like,
I think you can write technically without writing in legalese to the point where it is impenetrable by the layperson, right?
agreed.
But I do see Nino's point, though. At least this is the one that conversation I had with Michael about how there's contradicting definitions throughout all of our legislation. And at that point, I've realized, okay, me trying to exist in the current city that we live in, I don't fucking want a glossary for our fucking legislation. That sounds
Agreed.
like annoying as fuck for everybody. However, I can see the point of we're reaching now where we have 70 pieces of legislation. Most of it's contradicting either each other or the Constitution, and we have to have it standardized. And if it means that me and some of the mayoral cabinet and whoever else of the DOJ want to sit down and try and compile that, I am down for it. It will suck. It's not going to be fun. It will be work. But if it's for what's best for the city, then yeah, I agree.
Craig Barrett
yes, it is sweaty,
has
though. I don't
already...
care what anyone says. That's fucking sweaty.
Yeah, I don't know what sweaty means. That's part of the issue, right? My definition of sweaty is very different from, and I think that's kind of why I poked at it was, what I think is sweaty might be different from what you think is sweaty, from what Nathaniel thinks is sweaty.
I agree. I think you're right. I think it's just, again, it's going to cause, I think in the end, it's going to cause a lot of work for us, which I am not opposed to. I put my hand in there the first time that Michael told me about what's going on with the legislation and said, how can I help? I'm sure there's going to be a narrative that's run that, oh my God, Arcadia is saying it's sweaty and that she doesn't know how to do the work and she's going to fucking justice for a day.
Yeah, but
what is... You guys, the justices in the mesh, should probably get together with Dr. Nashville, of course, and like have a discussion about, like high level philosophy about what you're trying to accomplish, right? That's probably more useful than fighting individual pieces. I think, like, if you get together and you decide you want to like build on the idea of transparency and clarity and precision, and then that's what you're going for, that'll probably help you better than actively fighting over individual pieces of legislation.
I agree. I want to paint something and make an argument for why so let me start by saying I think sweaty is when you start to get pedantic about the word is and or like things that
where
you're
a comma is.
Okay, I don't think that's sweaty. I think that's commas are very important because the lack of, because one's a conjunction and one isn't.
Important. Okay.
Well, let me give you an example. But a comma completely changes meaning, right?
Oh,
I agree. I do agree with that.
Yeah. So
to your point, but I think my fear is for the majority of this city, it's not.
Well, but that is why. So this is like a two-pronged thing, right? Why is a comma possibly sweaty? A comma is sweaty if the legislation was written in a way where the comma was so important. You get what I'm saying? That when the legislation is written, it shouldn't be dependent on the comma to begin with, right?
I agree. And that's my point of why I find it sweaty.
Yes.
If
Sorry,
I'm
go ahead,
drafting, I
Nathaniel.
draft in legalese because that's the way I was trained, right? So I get it. I totally understand.
Never mind.
I know. I understand. And I try not to, right? I try not to.
I know you
But
do.
so
knew
for
you
me,
attempt
for
to.
me, for me, the like to get to what Nino was saying about the definition of sweaty. For me, it's when somebody tries to obfuscate the intention or the meaning behind technicalities that hold no reference.
Agreed.
It's like it's
But that's law
intentional
work.
deception. It's intentional deception, right? And
That's
it's
how I
like-
won a lot of court cases.
Yeah, me too. Like, it's the way the law works, right? But it's harsh when you're coming at it, because here's the thing: we're all not lawyers anymore, right? We've all like ascended now to public service.
Technically, I still am.
That's true, actually. Yeah.
But like we've ascended to public service, and now the intention is no longer to win a court case; it is to serve the people. So what serves the people better?
Agreed. And so to bring back my where I'm driving with this is, I don't want to call it a glossary because I think definition should be inside the particular. Piece of legislation should be describing. You shouldn't need external. So when we write it, the way that we go about it, right? And this is kind of why I was like, hey, if this piece of legislation you guys think is not written well, please let me know. Because keep in mind, we went through so much. I really don't want to go back in the past, but I think the context is important. Is originally when we wrote legislation, it was fun legislation, like, you know, fucking Blaine County's bringing the diseases down and like all kinds of shit like that, you know, like, you know, tongue-in-cheek kind of shit.
Right.
And we're told, like, no, you can't do that. You know what I mean? It's got to be serious. And then we're like, okay. And then we did it one way. And then it was like, this is too complicated. And then we made it more simplified. And then it was like, this legislation is rejected because it's missing all these things. And we're like, okay, fuck me. Like, what the fuck do you want?
I'm sorry,
like,
that's
you know
not
what
funny.
I mean?
It's more of the nature of it.
Oh, no, no,
actually
absolutely.
ridiculous, and that's like where the humor come from.
And so eventually we came with our own standard and just said, fuck you. We're going to write it. We're going to remove humor. We're going to write it like a technical piece. And so if there's any vocabulary that can get confused on, we're going to define it in the document. And the intent of that is the definition is in the scope of the document and is not intended out of the scope, which is why I actually don't necessarily agree with Michael that writ of mandamus is in one place and not another, because the writ of mandamus in the impeachment is within the scope of an impeachment, and the writ of mandamus in the judicial powers document
the codified powers,
is within the scope of that, right? Scope matters, right? The point when scope you need to get out of the scope is if you're talking about something outside of those two. So if someone's talking about writ of mandamus outside of judicial powers and out of impeachment, then you might need to rectify between the two. You know what I mean? Right. And so what I'm arguing for is not necessarily that. Well, it's not even arguing. We're going to be writing this up, right? It's not a glossary we're creating, but rather this is how Los Santos County Mayor's Office is expected to write their legislation and what our meaning behind our writing is, right? So it's a standard.
I could appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a standardization document. I forgot what the fuck it's called.
But include the definitions within the legislation like you already have been, which I did notice because I spent a good chunk of last night reading through so I can answer your question. I'm still looking through it, by the way. Just give me a bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, I agree. I think a supplementary document to standardize things is only going to help. It's going to be work, and that's fine.
And that standardization, sorry to interrupt you there.
Fine, I appreciate it.
The standardization isn't necessarily just to resolve how a judge may read something outside of the original intent of the writer, but rather to make sure that those internal to my cabinet who are writing in uniformity, right, to a degree. But also that in the future when another mayor comes, because I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know how the fuck I'm like holding pred by by his hand on a lot of things. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I fuck with Pred, but there's even with him and that guy's very capable. I don't know how the fuck you're gonna get an Osvaldo as mayor writing legislation, or someone within his cabinet writing it. And so this is to help those in the future be like, oh, this is how I write it, right? So, and they may not understand why, for example, they got to put the definitions in, or why they need the introduction to express this, or why the justification should be written this way. But that document is going to explain all that, right? And
unfortunately, it sounds like something that my department should have done a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the help on this one, you know.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah.
So
I can recognize that should have happened months ago.
I think it's only now that legislation is coming ahead. And, you know, we are at the forefront of something that hasn't existed in San Andreas before, which is 4 legislative bodies, right? And a effectively functioning government. As much as people may, from the outside, may, you know, looking in, might be like, holy fuck, this is dysfunctional. This is the reality of what was going to happen, right? And we're just figuring out how all the pieces fit together. And it's going to take more time and a lot more, you know, bullshit before things get better. But that's a part of, you know, the natural course of things, I feel, right?
Couldn't agree more. Is there I feel really confident about what is there anything else that I can help clear up from the dialogue yesterday that we felt like there was contentions with?
So not really. I think that big thing was really, I think, like I said, I think on our side, speaking on just my cabinet, we were caught up on, we just want to understand what the logic was. And I know maybe saying it that way might be, you know, we just want to know why. Like, how did you interpret it so we can understand how y'all currently go about looking at things so we can do better on our end, right? Well, not, and there might have been more to that, but that was kind of the big thing.
No, of course. I know I've already said like where we stood on it. It was a rough one. I can admit that. But that's where they stood, and I, you know, brought it forward on that point. And I hope, especially with us being able to define this, I think that was a great solution for the future, that this like exact situation doesn't happen again.
Yeah. Which honestly, I don't mind that it happens again. Transparently, right? Like, I am completely okay with you having a absolutely different opinion of interpretation. That's normal.
Oh, that's going to happen. I can promise you that.
Absolutely. And so it will happen again. It's just once again, it took until you said something for us to actually get an answer. And
that is odd to me. I apologize for that.
No, well, it's not, you don't have to apologize. It's, you know, you didn't do it, right? Like, we were getting bullshit over and over and over and over again, and the answers kept getting obfuscated, right? It's kind of like, you need something for me to do your work, and I keep telling you some bullshit or like deflecting or whatever, when it's just a simple question, because like, we're just trying to understand, right? And
I think sorry, go ahead. I apologize.
Oh no, that's all.
Unfortunately, the intention with the vagueness, and again, I don't speak for the other justices. I can't really say why they did what they did.
It's not conducive for Nino to be like, Hart was being extremely difficult by giving a straight answer.
You know, we are at each other's throats behind closed doors. We will bicker with each other, but we do come to a consensus of either, you know, majority or, again, just a general consensus, and then we try as a DOJ to stand together on that front. And I think, if anything, that might be the intention. But again, I can't really say.
So I would like to pick at that a little bit, and this is once again for clarity's sake. And even though philosophically I don't necessarily agree with it, but I would like to understand it better. Is what I don't know much about the internals of the DOJ. And I understand, having had this conversation, and some of what I pulled at in the meeting, is that y'all collectively discuss something and then come in from a uniform position. As from an outside body looking in, what's confusing is if all the judges are sort of discussing something, the question becomes why, in my mind. Because when I apply it to like other I don't want to use the word other places, right? A judge reviews something. Sometimes it's 2 or 3. They review something, they have an opinion, and then that opinion is then applied, right? But then if there is an appeal or whatever, there are another judge or justices that preside over it. So where I'm going with this is, why does the entire, it to me sounds like the entire DOJ is self-conflicting itself.
That's not necessarily the so when it comes to like court rulings, that's not how it works. Obviously you have a judge presiding, and they take things into effect. I mean, yeah, you know what, you'll see us, we'll go to a corner and sometimes we'll bounce ideas off of each other, if and that will conflict the other judges 100%, but we'll always make sure that there's at least somebody not involved, so that not all of us are conflicted, because we have actually decent numbers at the moment, well, at least just in the recent month. That's the intention. There is going to be some conflicting, because we like having each other's opinions. We need it. We rely on it.
Absolutely. I guess what I
think it comes down to like any Department of Justice thing, where like we all stand in a circle and we'll devil's advocate at each other. But the idea is that we're able to have abstract discussions, right? That maybe are dealing with very specific objective matters, but we maintain an abstract stance to it. We don't get personally invested. We just have a discussion around the subject at hand. A conclusion may be raised, but it doesn't necessarily, like, I will argue the toss and I will argue devil's advocate on any position, regardless of my own personal beliefs, because I think it's necessary for healthy debate. I am often the voice of dissent, and that is intentional. And I think that, like, it's healthy for a Department of Justice to be able to do that, but it comes traditionally, like, because this thing has always occurred. It comes traditionally from a Department of Justice which is much smaller than it is now. Like, the number of justices currently, the number of judges currently is probably as healthy as it's been in years. Lawyers, not so much, but everything else is like, well stocked, right? So I understand your point, Mr. Mayor. I think it could be important to make sure at least one justice sits out. But so you've got an unconflicted point of view.
Even if one is,
wait. You're thinking this is all happening like within the other kinds of channels, that other kind of discussions have been happening.
That's exactly it. Like, because with everyone that was in the meeting, so from our POV, right, from my POV, I'm like, bro, all these judges were involved in interpreting this, then how the hell do you have your own opinion?
Well, you have your own, you have trust in each other as judges. I mean, like, why are you a judge if you don't have your own conscious, like, thought process and not able to think for yourself? That it completely is the opposite of what we're here for. Honestly, most of us got these positions because we're exceptionally opinionated and can think for ourselves. But we'll do it with each other, and we'll butt heads and we'll disagree. But at the end of it, we do kind of come to a general consensus and either agree or be like, okay, I think you are more right in this instance on this part, and we'll kind of piece it together. But it's not just only that one avenue that I think that a lot of people are kind of not very receptive to, and I can understand why. I 100% can. So, and again, to the point that I had with you last night, it's just unfortunately there was only so many avenues for reaching the very few justices that we had.
I should be clear, like, my contention with the government emails, and this made it hard to express in that meeting, because once again there was a lot of interjections taking place by other parties, is that if it's multi-part. One is, I totally respect that you need opinions among yourselves, but like, it seemed from our perspective that if the opinion was taken from like more than like 2 other judges, now all of a sudden like it's creating a bit of a conundrum where do you really need more than 2 other voices to step in, right? Because even if the opinion that is arrived to is less correct or less scrutinized, there's at least a lot of availability of judges to preside over whatever due process takes place. Because the more that are conflicted, the less possibility of a scheduled case, right? The second thing, and so the volume, I mean, I don't know how many people are in the room, but to hear like 7 judges uniformly say, we all read it this way, for us is like, well, do you, sorry?
There was 3 of us.
Oh, it wasn't the entire room?
No.
Okay. So that was part of it, right? Like, and that's what we wanted to know. And that's why we were asking, not so that we could find like a target, like what judges to say, fuck you to, but by knowing the who, we know who to address. Otherwise,
I completely believe in accountability. I can understand that.
And not just accountability, but because then we're not saying the DOJ, right? I genuinely want to be able to say, well, Arcadia believes this, right? We're in disagreement with her. That's okay. That's healthy. But without the names, it turns into the DOJ as a consequence because it's obfuscated.
There are going to be times where that's going to happen. I'm going to let you know that right now. I can understand accountability, but there are going to be times, like with your cabinet, that you will link arms and be like, hey, we are standing together on this front.
Agree.
Maybe not everyone will agree, but that's for the best health of the department or for your cabinet. I'm sure you could understand that. And that was just a singular incident of that exact situation.
So there was only 3.
I wish major court cases had dissenting opinions given by other justices. I think that'd be fire.
I think so too.
If you're writing a ruling and you have a justice who can give a dissenting opinion, I think that leads to further conversation down the line. I don't know.
Yeah, may I ask 3, because I just look, fuck it. Hart told us it was everyone minus like a few.
Hart wasn't awake. She doesn't know what she's doing.
So that's kind of why I think a lot of this shit turned to shit, is because we spoke with her for 2 hours in which she misrepresented what turned out to be the reality. She told us she was asleep. She told us a bunch of shit. And then
she was asleep. Yeah,
like,
that is true.
And while I understand, I don't know what the hell she's doing. I understand that maybe speculatively, maybe she was like trying to defend you guys by giving us the best answers, but that's not conducive, because now it's bullshit with y'all's name on it. You know what I'm saying? So,
okay, not to dodge accountability, but just to like clarify things. For example, I had nothing to do with any of those discussions, right? There were people who just weren't involved. Absolutely, 100%. There were just individuals who were not involved.
Yup.
So, who can I ask? Well, then who was it? It was you, the Irish guy.
Wait, 1 second.
Yep.
Hey, Ventura, can I call you right back?
I think he's Scottish.
Scottish?
So what?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll call you back. Me, Murray, Ava were in the room, and then when I stepped out, the angry mob, Barrack showed up, but he wasn't part of the conversation.
Oh my fucking God. See, that's all we were asking for. Because, and I hope you understand our perspective, is that's why we were asking for names and they wouldn't give it to us. Because then we can talk to you guys directly and be like, what's going on? But instead we had some party speaking on behalf of y'all, and then we can't have a conducive conversation. And then it just turns the heat.
Unfortunately, I think also there's just been a very horrible dialogue between our 2 entities. And I think maybe the justices were attempting to avoid a witch hunt. If my best guess, I don't know. I hate that shit though. I'd rather come forward and be like, "Yep, that was me."
I think it's a part of the job. I don't know why that would even be the case, because this is the first time we're meeting Hart, to be honest. And Hollow we've been working with. Yeah, we haven't seen her for 4 months until recently.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good
so, now maybe with Angel, but I mean, look, I mean, and I'm not going to touch that. But that is, I think, what we were looking for, to be honest. And I think and I want to give you a little bit more insight.
Okay, just a heads up, we have like 3 minutes.
Oh shit.
Yeah, sorry.
When the writ was originally given to, I posted a writ on Wednesday, and I got an immediate reply to it. They wouldn't even tell me who wrote it. So the perception was all the DOJ collectively signed off on ignoring the writ. You get what I'm saying? Like, I don't know what, that shouldn't be happening, right? Like, if the response was from like one or two judges, fine.
Happening where like the entirety of the DOJ is being sued right now, so none of us can actually preside over it.
There you go. And it creates an environment where people, like, look, I think you guys have the hardest job. Well, you used to. Now I think some of that falls on some other shoulders, but you have one of the worst jobs. Everyone's going to hate you guys because there's always a loser, right? But the DOJ does not help itself, in my opinion, when you get what I'm saying, right? Like, if there's no name attached to it.
If I'm sentencing someone to death, it's my name attached to it.
Yes.
I've done it 16 times in my career.
And I can promise that mentality with myself and the new justices coming into place will be the ideology moving forward.
Love it.
That is going to be a forefront of our, like, I want to say campaign or whatever.
Love it.
You know what I mean? Like, fucking.
And that
office,
was
whatever.
And that, by the way, was the premise of our government email issue. It wasn't. Number one was the receipt of it, right? Because we can't take any action. Part of the receipt thing that we were trying to tell Hart and Hollowworth, because we don't even know, they wouldn't tell us who the judges were. They were like hiding you guys, and we're like, but we can't even talk to them. Then we can't even take any civil action if we need to, etc., etc. But the second thing was, the perception was being pushed indirectly that all the judges made the ruling, and so we're like, what the fuck? You know what I mean?
That's fair. No, that wasn't the case, unfortunately. Or unfortunately. Yeah, whatever.
Good combo. I would love to have, sorry, go ahead, but just in case we do pop, I'd love to talk more later.
Okay. I have no problem with that. Really quick, is there anything that you want me to prioritize legislation-wise?
My audits have been waiting for 3 weeks.
Audits first? Okay, I'll do audits first.
And my FOIAs.
Bro, that one I'm trying.
You're the boss
okay?
now.